Images being replayed to an increasingly horrified people.
Calming down. You see? Boom!
Wow.
Oh, shit.
Wow.
This morning there are no attempts being made at estimating the final death toll. How many thousands have died will take many, many days to establish. But in the minutes after the two crashes into the Twin Towers, hundreds of rescuers, police and firefighters gathered at the base of the buildings. Only to perish themselves as the entire structures collapsed. A third skyscraper has now collapsed. And the New York skyline, one of the shining symbols of America and of the free world, has been shattered. The rescue resources of the world's greatest city seem powerless. Although a few people were led to safety, dazed and unable to comprehend the scale of what was engulfing them on what had begun as a normal working day. It was an attack on the very heart of American business. President George Bush returned to the White House last.
Watch the second plane slam into the World Trade Center.
4 planes successfully hijacked. This must have taken months of planning, is that right?
This would certainly have taken months of planning, in some ways years of planning, because the networks, certainly of some of the groups that we're pointing the finger at now, have been in place for years. Months of planning, but remember the groups who may have carried this out have had years to plan this. They've had dry runs. They have in fact tried to do this before. They've tried to crash aeroplanes into cities, to crash ships into ports. They've tried to take out the World Trade Center before. So this doesn't come out of the blue.
Unimaginable scenes of Manhattan there, and perhaps the grief of yesterday turning to anger today. We heard President Bush talking of a quiet anger. One suspects the people of America will be less quiet in their anger. What, in practical terms, can America now, first of all, do to try to establish who did this?
Well, I think that's work which is clearly underway, and a lot of that is straightforward police work, identifying the perpetrators, those who actually hijacked the planes. But remember that the US intelligence community has been looking at these sorts of groups for many years. They have a lot of sources. What we've found with previous attacks, such as in Saudi Arabia, in East Africa, is that over a period of years it is possible to track down the individuals and the groups.
If it is the name that seems to be on everybody's lips, Osama bin Laden, in hiding in Afghanistan, what, in practical terms, can America do to get him?
Well, of course, let's remember that although the American public may well want a cathartic one-off response, a military response, this isn't how terrorism is fought. The Americans know very well that terrorism...
The first airliner, an American Airlines flight, ploughed into the Trade Center's North Tower. Then the second jet found its target. The moment it became clear, the US was under attack. From the ground, it seemed scarcely believable. The moment United Airlines Flight 175 from Boston hit the South Tower. One report suggests a passenger on one of the hijacked flights was a known terrorist, clearly willing to die for his cause. The South Tower was the first to fall.
The day the world changed.
I hope I live. I hope I live. It's coming down on me.
A paramedic filming as the World Trade Center collapses. Good evening. From almost certainly thousands of dead, a handful of firemen and police are rescued. New York remains shut down, America still sealed from the outside world. Tonight, much more is known about what really happened. We report how the planes were hijacked and targeted. A remarkable eyewitness account from a British lawyer who escaped from the 57th floor. Passing doomed firemen on their way up. The stumps of the great towers generating calls in America for drastic retaliation. Fueled too by perhaps 800 dead at the Pentagon, the bodies still being recovered. And is this a hijacker's car, flight manual and Quran inside, found at Boston Airport? And the FBI, even as we speak, storming a nearby hotel. And the increasing conviction tonight that Osama bin Laden in Afghanistan is both the culprit and now the target of war. Now, they were more than acts of terror, they were acts of war. The words of President Bush today as America inched towards a military response to yesterday's terrorist assault. NATO members are meeting now in Brussels to consider declaring the attack an assault on all of NATO, increasing support for an American strike. But before that, the increasingly forlorn efforts to find survivors amid the Manhattan rubble. As the rescue teams searched, shocking new images and accounts emerged of yesterday's atrocity. Lindsay Taylor reports now on the disturbing pictures and the desperate efforts that have dominated the day after.
The moment America changed forever. The fire services carrying out routine maintenance when a loud aircraft noise causes them to look up. What they see is beyond imagination.
Oh, shit!
The images captured by an amateur cameraman are the first to show the initial plane crash into the World Trade Center's North Tower. It's a terrible confirmation of what we know occurred. Foreknowledge does nothing to diminish the shocking impact. In this most video-aware of countries, the attacks are inevitably filmed from several locations. And so it is that more images of the second attack on the South Tower have emerged.
Don't touch it.
Oh my God! Oh my God! Oh no! Oh my God!
Each angle compels the mind to overcome a natural sense of disbelief.
Boom!
What's going on?
Wow.
Oh, shit.
Wow. Do you see this aircraft?
However you look at it,
I've got it all.
it's appalling and incomprehensible.
That is it. This is terrible.
We now know that as the buildings caught fire, there were several thousand people inside. The sight of survivors signalling for their lives at the windows, some falling to their deaths, was bound to make the emergency services try even more desperately to reach them. But it would cost them their own lives. Hundreds of firefighters, police and medical staff either ran to safety or died along with those they were trying to save. It was as though a volcano had erupted in downtown New York. It's impossible to imagine the scene as rescuers face death themselves, but a paramedic filming as he works gives us a graphic insight.
I hope I live. I hope I live. It's coming down on me. Here it comes. I'm getting behind a car. It's incredible. Okay, I'm gonna have to go find people who need help, because I don't think I'm one of them.
He asks a fireman for a share of his respirator so he can continue.
Can I just get a toot off your respirator? Can I get a toot? I'm just getting a couple of clean breaths. That's good. Okay. Back to you. This is the car I hid behind. It saved my life.
Yeah, Mike! Mike! Mike, come over here! Yeah!
Anybody need a doctor?
Where are you? Oxygen.
Don't have oxygen.
Hello, Doc.
Hey, that guy needs some oxygen if someone can share it with him.
10-4.
Thanks.
There are survivors, but in the confusion and choking dust, it's not clear which incident they've survived or where they've emerged from.
I thought we were done. I thought it was over.
I've never seen nothing like it in my life.
And just as the dust is beginning to settle, several hours later comes a third collapse. The Salomon Brothers building, from 47 stories to none. The hijackers' attack on the symbol of American economic dominance had brought even greater destruction than they might have hoped for. How could anyone survive inside this? And where does anyone start to look? With darkness, the searching goes on, but with little hope of finding anyone still alive in the collapsed buildings. Looking at such images, it seems just like piles of rubble. Impossible to relate to the scale of the human loss. Thousands of people gone. Each and every loss is a personal family tragedy. One man, Ronnie Clifford, whose family's from Cork, somehow survived the initial strike on the trade centre where he worked. Only later did he learn that his sister Ruth and her daughter Juliana were on board one of the planes which crashed into the towers, a fact unknown when he first called home.
So he rang me as soon as he got home, quite emotional, very traumatized. But at that point was quite worried about Ruth because he also knew that she was flying out. My niece Juliana was a lovely, beautiful little 4-year-old girl, full of life, and my sister was the bubbliest person in the world. In one sense, we're probably one of the luckier people that we actually have confirmation where other people are missing loved ones and looking for them at this point.
In Pittsburgh, scene of another crashed plane, there are moving accounts from families saying they received calls from loved ones on the aircraft telling them they'd been hijacked and were going to die. The final words of public relations executive Mark Bingham to his family were the same as those of the others.
He just said, I want to let you all know that I love you very, very much in case I don't see you again.
I said that?
That the plane has been taken over by hijackers. And then I said, well, we love you very much too, Mark. Let me go get your mother.
From the rubble and the ashes, the president and political leaders have been trying to resurrect the American resolve, urging people not to let the perpetrators break their spirit. But whatever the response, it will not bring back the dead. This act cannot be undone. This country will never be the same again.
Lindsay Taylor, as the full horror of yesterday's atrocities are beginning to emerge, so are the stories of those who were caught up in the worst of the carnage. A British lawyer, Mark Oliver, was in his office on the 57th floor of the World Trade Center and felt the impact of the first plane crashing into his tower. A little earlier tonight, I asked him to describe his hour-long escape down the endless stairwells of the skyscraper.
I got into the office early yesterday. Thankfully, my floor was almost completely deserted. There were very few people. I know the time exactly. It was 8:42. I looked at my watch because suddenly the building lurched very violently forward. I mean, I was flung across my desk. So I was standing right by the window, and just on the other side of the window was what I now appreciate was what was the remains of the plane. And that was a truly horrific sight of what was falling literally within 3 feet of my face. You know, what was obviously burning fuel, it was alight, chairs. I saw a shoe go past, and there were things that I won't tell you that I realised what they were when they went past. We started to proceed down and immediately began to still smell acrid, burning smoke. I don't know whether you know the World Trade Center very well, but you have to change elevator banks at floor 44. When we started to cross the elevator bank, there was huge plumes of black smoke billowing out of one of the elevator shafts. And it was at that point I realised quite how much serious danger we were in, because before it was above and we were moving down, but it was obvious that the building now was heavily on fire.
Were there other people joining you from other
yes,
floors?
It was, and it was getting increasingly congested, particularly after the 44th floor, because what happened after them was obviously some stairwells were filling with smoke, so people were being diverted onto our stairwell. And I, at that point, lost all of my colleagues. We'd gone down about 5 stories from the 44th floor, when we suddenly lots of screaming from above us to move to the right and to move into single file, and the burns and the walking wounded walked past us, and people obviously rushing to get them down. They were the priority to get them down, and that continued for the next 10 or 20 stories. People rushing past with burns, fairly bad burns. But about the 20th floor, that was when the first firemen started to go past us up into the building. And we were all thanking them, and they were exhausted by this stage. They'd gone up 20 flights. The stairwell was extremely hot. We were all dripping with sweat. That, John, is the tragedy more than anything else in a way. These people were desperately trying to help. They were struggling up that stairwell. They were carrying huge equipment. They were exhausted. We were trying to cheer them on. They were trying to cheer each other on. I'm aware very much that most of those people are now dead, and they died trying to save mine and other people's lives.